Welcome to Creatively Christian, a podcast by Theophany Media, where we inspire, inform, educate, and empower creative Christians of all types. I'm one of your hosts, Brannon Hollingsworth. We've got an awesome interview today with the founder of Theophany Media, Jake Doberenz, talking with Brannon Hollingsworth about what it was like to start Theophany Media and Creatively Christian, and a lot more besides. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure and tell all of your friends so that this show can continue to bless others out there in the world. Hello, everybody out there in podcast land. This is Brannon Hollingsworth coming to you from Theophany Media's Creatively Christian podcast, and I am super stoked to have the brainchild, the creative curator of Theophany Media here with me today. Doing the podcast, Jake Doberenz. Is that right?
Doberenz.
Yeah. Okay, Jake Doberenz here with me. I'm super excited for that. Jake, welcome to your podcast.
Thank you for welcoming to my podcast.
All right, so I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you, then we're going to jump right into it. So Jake Doberenz is a minister, writer, and middle school teacher in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Jake received both his bachelor's degree and his Master of Theological Studies degree from Oklahoma Christian University. He founded Theophany Media, a Christian educational media organization. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
We need laugh tracks and we need applause tracks and stuff.
That's true. Yeah.
Those will be awesome.
People won't know, when the joke's supposed to be funny unless somebody's laughing in the background.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to the podcast. For those of you that are watching or listening, we're actually recording this the week before Thanksgiving. You may be listening to it later because we are being dutiful, hardworking Christians trying to get a lot of stuff done before it's time for the harvest and before we're actually releasing these. And so we're super happy to have Jake on. But if we make any references to time that seem out of place, that's why. So Jake, tell us a little bit about, I want to know, I'm desperately wanting to know what inspired you to begin Theophany Media.
Well, I've struggled with what to do with my life. I assume that's a pretty common common thing people go through. And for a while, I've been kind of on this trajectory to do teaching in some way, get some fancy degrees, be a professor, that kind of thing. I've been always really interested in kind of the deep sides of the Christian faith. And for a while, it was kind of a compromise because when I was a kid, I wanted to do everything but as a Christian. I was going to be a lawyer, but Christian. I was going to be a scientist, but Christian, to kind of inject God into all these spaces. But then I decided, I can't be all of those things. Right. I got to pick one. And so I kind of settled on teaching the Bible because I thought, what if I can inspire people to be the best Christian they can be in all those other fields? I don't have to be the scientist, because I have kind of a thing about blood. Wasn't going to work out to be a biologist like I wanted to be. Right. I don't have to be a lawyer. Somebody else can study all those laws and inject their faith into that. So I was going to be a Bible teacher. Now, fast forward to May 2020. Before that, but May 2020 is when I started Theophany Media. I kind of got to this point where I wasn't quite as excited about this sort of academic journey that I was currently on. I enjoyed some of it, but then another part of me just was sort of envisioning my future, kind of being stuck at a desk, teaching all the time, reading all that stuff. And I kind of remembered this desire from a young age to be a creative. Roughly about 5th grade, I wrote my first short story that I remember, although I had been telling stories and doing stories a lot before that. And I wrote this 5-paragraph short story, and I just fell in love with writing. And I always kind of liked that, but I don't know. No one ever told me you could do that as a career or or at least I never really got that idea that you could just like be a writer. You could like do creative things as a career. So that was always going to be like a side hobby. Like I never thought I would give up writing. It was just going to be that thing I did. But then as I invested in my academic career, you know, it was becoming more books, nonfiction books, and that kind of thing. But I had that naggingness to go back to my kind of creative roots, so to speak. So, long story short, Theophany Media is actually a marriage of all those things. I love this theology, this kind of academic, kind of deep understanding. Maybe academic's not the best word, but this really deep understanding of the faith. But I also like the creative stuff. And what better way to talk about that really deep stuff than something creative, fiction, stories. So that's what I did Theophany, to kind of fill that space. So I kind of see it as sort of in that intersection between like the deep truths of faith and then what's accessible to people. And I also kind of created it as a way to again, being that in between place between like cheesy Christian stories and something really worldly that doesn't have anything about faith in it. So I didn't want to be over the top with faith, but I didn't want to be against faith, I guess you could say. Something in the middle. So I created Theophany Media as the catch-all to kind of do these projects that I wanted to do and explore these things that I wanted to do in those in-between spaces.
And tell folks, for people who might not know, what theophany means.
Yeah, so theophany means this appearance of God, when God shows up in the story. Right. And I chose that name because that really captured what I wanted to do. I wanted to, in some cases, point out when God is showing up, like in some kind of non-Christian movie, God still shows up in places. But then also I wanted to help creators to orchestrate this appearance of God in their story. What does that look like? What does it look like to have God show up? Right. Whether as a character or just as a theme or something like that. So,
and I think what you're really talking about is really what Christians are really called to do. You know, we're supposed to live our faith in the midst of our lives. You know, it's not supposed to be this segregated portion of our existence that we only tap into, you know, on Sundays or Wednesday nights or whenever you happen to worship. It's supposed to be an everyday, every moment kind of thing. We're supposed to be, you know, praying at all times. We're supposed to be, you know, living through the Spirit and living life more abundantly. So, I mean, this is supposed to be an ongoing conversation that we have with people around us, with people we interact with, and it should also bleed through into the products and the things that we create. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I used to kind of have that mistaken notion, like, you know, the true Christians all become ministers or whatever. And maybe that was a part of my motivation that I don't really want to admit. I was serious about the faith, so of course I was going to go into ministry. But now I don't see it that way. There are so many different ways to do ministry. We're all called to the vocation of ministry, and sometimes our vocation is that ministry, whatever that looks like. And creative people are weird, you know, for lack of a better term. And they inhabit this really unique space to do ministry that's sometimes a little bit more explicit than if you're at an accounting job like my wife or something like that. Right. And so it's just a really cool space to inhabit and to talk to those kind of people.
Yeah, I have no doubt that as Paul was sitting there making tents, he was telling people about the gospel. You know, there's just, definitely, you know, there's nothing that, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says you're supposed to separate what you do from who you are. And right. That's not what, that really is not what the world expects you to do. The world expects you as well to be yourself, you know, even though we know that's antagonistic to Scripture in some interpretations. But right. I'd love to know a little bit more about where you find your sources of inspiration specifically. We've talked a little bit about generally, but where are some, you know, when you're writing print, so you've written screenplays and poetry and fiction and nonfiction, and obviously as a minister, you write, you know, ministerial documents, but where do you go for some of your sources for inspiration?
Well, I'm big into what I might kind of call that like traditional pop culture space.
Okay.
So I'm talking superheroes, science fiction, fantasy. I love that kind of stuff. And when I write, it's usually in those kind of genres, especially superheroes. Really big into superheroes. I have my Avengers Infinity War poster right here. I have an Avengers Cup, actually. You can tell in Marvel versus DC which one I side with. But so to answer your question, I get a lot of my inspiration from those kind of stories, which, especially something like superheroes or the kind of comic books, they get so deep into human psyche and just these big timeless truths. Science fiction, fantasy, they've always been all about telling these like really big truths. Even if you don't recognize the world that you're in, there is something so truthful in some cases, or they're at least exploring those or wrestling with those ideas. So I love those stories. When I write my in the kind of the fiction works that I deal with are usually superheroes. Time travel is another one that I think just kind of allows you to raise really interesting questions. You can explore some really cool things and have fun.
Well, are you able to bring some of this inspiration into like your devotionals and, things of that nature, or do you have to kind of keep a pretty clean line there?
Well, I think that one way we can use pop culture and all that is to relate to people. It's that connection piece. So when I preach, and I'm kind of known for this, I don't get to preach a lot. But when I preach, you can pretty much expect there's a movie or two reference in there. And in fact, I taught a class on Christology early 2020. Who is Christ? What is that all about? And I used a book by Todd Miles that I can't remember the name of, but I'll have to tell you later so you can put that in the show notes.
Okay.
And it uses superheroes as an example to talk about the nature of Jesus. Specifically, the superheroes represent who Jesus is not. So Superman is this idea that Jesus is just God, has no humanity, and just kind of is an alien from another planet, so to speak, comes to our Earth, and he's just super powerful and isn't really one of us, even if he looks like one of us. So that's just one example. So I taught that whole class using that. I showed clips from different superhero films, used those examples. Some people didn't quite get all the references. There's always that fear when you're talking about pop culture. But a lot of people get excited about that kind of thing. They understand Superman more than they understand, okay, how exactly is Jesus both human and God at the same time?
Right.
So pop culture is the language of the people, so to speak. So if I'm writing a devotional or doing a sermon, I try to include something there.
Cool.
And that just helps it relate to people, helps it kind of come to life.
Yeah, and there are so many moments, like when you watch movies or when you read comics or things like that, where the hero of the story has a moment of sacrifice. There's this moment, and many times when it's depicted visually, they're in a cross pose.
That's right.
And so you have these things in pop culture that it's almost like it's ingrained in our psyche. Imagine that, the God who made us ingrained this in us to look for that imagery and to have those salvation moments resonate with us for some reason. And I think it's because it's built into who we are and what we're supposed to be as Christians.
Yeah, definitely.
So here, as you well know, at Theophany Media and Creatively Christian Podcast, we try and divide things up into 4 sections. One's inspire. We've talked a little bit about inspiration. The next is inform, and then we have educate and empower. So let's jump into kind of that inform section and tell us a little bit about what you think, what makes art or anything, any kind of art, whether it's actual visual art or whether it is written or movies or what have you, what makes something like that Christian?
Yeah, such a big question that I'm still wrestling with, sometimes changing my mind on.
Sure.
This has kind of been a lot of my life's work right now. But I'll give you kind of a taste of
Okay,
what's going on
sure,
in my brain.
sure.
So, on one hand, I want to say that, um, any art that a Christian makes is Christian art.
Okay.
As we already discussed, when you create something, you put a piece of yourself in there, um, and if you are somebody who's a sanctified follower of Christ, hopefully you can't help but your values and your morality and your allegiance to Jesus just kind of like seeps out
Hmm.
into that creation.
Hmm.
And so there's a sense where I do want to call all of that um, Christian art. But just because I want to be careful with how we use language, um, Christian art is a little bit more explicit than that, I think. There's a there's a very intentional message, an intentional takeaway um, that is explicitly Christian instead of just something like, well, the lesson is uh, don't be mean to people,
Hmm.
which is
Hmm.
good, but the Buddhists are on board with that too.
Exactly.
The secular world's on board with that.
Hmm.
It's a great message,
Right,
but it's maybe not Christian. So
right,
Christian art um, make sure that Jesus is at the center here,
right.
because that's what makes the Christian faith different from everything else.
Absolutely.
Our whole ethic here is not just about being good people. It's about
Hmm.
being transformed by Jesus, which makes us good people. It affects how we behave. So
Right, right.
Christian art needs to have Jesus in there.
Okay.
And I mean, I already talked about a little bit about who Jesus is,
Hmm.
and he's human and divine. And I think good stories have that too. Those two kind of paradoxical elements,
Hmm.
but they're not quite against each other. They work
Sure.
together.
Hmm.
So these good stories have humanity, which not in the case of Jesus, but in our case, means that human element has sin
Hmm.
and it has temptation, but then it has divine. It has that kind of gospel element where um, there's a vision of the world made right. Even if you don't always get to see everything made right, there's just something else. Jesus provides that kind of something else in there. So that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a critical distinction. You have to be very careful as a Christian creative between just telling moral stories and telling stories that point people to the cross of Christ. To the gospel. I know Phil Vischer. He had that problem with VeggieTales. He realized one day that they were simply just telling moral stories, which aren't necessarily bad, but
Right.
that they were just teaching kids to be moral, but they were still pretty much ignorant of the Bible. And that's why he started that whole series on, what's in the Bible with Buck
Hmm.
Denver, where he literally just walks through the books of the Bible with his puppet show. And it's an amazing series. But that was a direct outpouring from the concern that you're voicing, and that, we've got to be sure and not just tell great moral stories. We've got to tell stories that make people wonder about who this Jesus is or what this gospel is all about. So I think that's phenomenal. So absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on to the educate section. So obviously you're a very educated young man. So tell us a little bit, how you see your academic interests either aligning or maybe conflicting with your creative interests, right? So, you've got a master's, and does that sometimes butt up against what you want to do creatively, or do they marry perfectly?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, we're doing this right before Thanksgiving.
Hmm.
We're actually a few days from me getting my master's.
Okay.
So when this is out, I will be Master Jake Doberenz. Okay, just
Okay.
kidding, not really. But right now, I'm not official. A few days out. So in academics, academic people care about language a lot,
Hmm.
which is good, but has some downsides sometimes. It's that idea where you see this kind of ivory tower academic wearing tweed, and
Hmm.
he just says all these big words,
Hmm.
and you're like, at first you're like, that's so wise, and you stop to think, what did that even mean? um, I don't want to become like that,
Right.
but academics care about language, and they oftentimes want to be so exact that it becomes so complicated and you can't actually wrap your brain around it.
Right.
So while I do want to be exact in the truth when I tell stories, I also want to make sure it is something that's kind of digestible, maybe to use that term.
Right.
I want to be exact in language, but also in a way that is understandable and that people can kind of apply it to their own situations. So in some sense, in storytelling, you have to be a little bit vague
Okay.
to have it kind of apply to a person's particular situation, because stories that are so precise and exact with that language again kind of, in a sense, they just lose the meaning. They're so narrow-minded that, and in some sense, you would call that like preachy or something.
Right.
The viewer or the reader doesn't have to think at all. They're just told exactly. So I want to push back against the academic side and kind of bring back a little bit of vagueness. But I also love the academic kind of search for truth. What I don't want to land is in this kind of postmodern truth is whatever.
Right.
I think there are some progressive Christian stories that I've seen, narratives that maybe lean too heavily into the vagueness. And I like the vagueness. I kind of want to go there sometimes, but I don't want to stay there.
Right.
There is truth, even though that truth is kind of muddied sometimes.
I get what you're saying. You don't want to come off with your short story sounding like a legal treatise, right? But you also don't want it to be so ambiguous that really nobody knows what's going on or has no direction or there's no moral. So practically speaking, like speaking from one creative to another, if you had a young author that maybe you were mentoring, or maybe a young composer or a young artist, and you were trying to, help them understand how to navigate this kind of balance between, very precise language and not being too vague, how would you tell them to handle that?
That's difficult. That's the first thing I would say. It's sort of a trial and error thing, first of all. But there's a sense in which beauty is kind of the solution. And what I mean by that is in the academic world, I have an academic article on the Pharisees published, and I have a master's thesis. And man, it's not fun getting those publication worthy, because your editors are always so concerned with the language, and what it ends up being is it doesn't sound interesting. They cut my puns, my jokes, unless I hide them in the footnotes. There is no beauty in that, even though it might be true. So what beauty allows us to do, again, beauty brings in that vagueness, but you can say something in a way that is interesting, engaging. It gets at multiple senses, I think, is kind of the solution here. So where the academic side is very head, and maybe the extreme creative is very heart, I want to be able to do both. And so sometimes that means, having some, story characters that are a little bit more one or the other. I want to try to poke at as many different people as I can. You want to have an ideal reader, but you don't you want to make sure it's accessible to multiple people. And so, I fear that this is it's not a super great concrete answer, but beauty is my solution. Because if you're thinking, okay, how can I say this truth in a way that's beautiful, which beauty and truth go together so nicely anyway. In some cases, I think the academic side of stuff has abandoned truth because they've abandoned beauty. Beauty brings risk, but it allows us to see something for what it is from an author's perspective. So,
okay. So it sounds like you could maybe, if you were leaning too far on the clinical side to begin with, you could start with a clinical kind of version and work more creativity into it. Or if you maybe started with more creative, like maybe more poetry or flowery language, you could start with that and then edit more clinicalness into it. Maybe you could kind of start from an extreme and work towards the middle, maybe. Would that work?
And that's the kind of thing that that I will do when I approach it. And I know a lot of creators will have an opinion on, if you're going to create a Christian story, do you start with the Christian truth and build the story, or do you start with the story and build the... I don't think there's a right way to do it.
Okay.
Recognize where you're starting and where you're going to go. In some Christian media, it's very much about the message, and that is it. And then your dialogue becomes clunky. Your acting is terrible. Whatever it is, because it's so focused on the truth. You have to get the apologetic argument down, or you have to quote the 6 scriptures, and they have to do the sinner's prayer. So the beauty elements reminds you, hey, you're also telling a story here. Your audience has some story expectations.
Gotcha.
Then again, on the flip side, if you're telling that story, inject some truth into that beauty. Awesome. Or else you're just telling a story for pure entertainment. So it's a balancing act, right? You're straddling those two worlds. Right. Super hard. I can't give anybody an answer. I wish I could. I wish I had an answer. I like absolute answers. I love it. That's just not the world we live in.
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of practice and a lot of rewrites is about the closest you can get to an answer. Is have a good editor and be prepared to rewrite a lot. But I mean, that's about becoming a writer anyway. So awesome.
Oh yeah, that's good.
All right, so let's move into empowering. So obviously, you started a podcast, and Theophany has another podcast as well, which we'll talk about in just a minute when we get into humor and the Bible. But you're a minister as well, so you're used to speaking and obviously being a Christian in our secular society. And you started Theophany Media, which is all about kind of sticking our big Christian foot right in the mouth of media. So so tell us a little bit about what's it like, or what are your thoughts about being and speaking as a Christian in secular society?
So we're in a weird spot in the world, in the West. So if you kind of think of society in stages, you had the pre-Christian times, which pretty self-explanatory. Then you had what they call like Christendom, for when Christianity was in charge, and everybody in the West was just sort of a Christian, and it was easy to be a Christian, unless you were like the other kind of Christian. Then they might kill you or something. But generally, it was fine. Now we're in sort of the post-Christian society. And so society has experienced Christians, and those haven't all been positive experiences. And that has affected a lot of people. And sometimes the society has really good complaints about Christianity. Sometimes they're not good. That's something that we have to figure out. What is a legitimate complaint? What's maybe just not. So to be a Christian now has to, one, recognize the sort of suspicion of Christians. I don't really want to paint that as a good or bad thing that we're in this place in society. There were problems when there was a pre-Christian society. There was problems when we were a Christian society. Now post-Christian. There's always problems. So it's not about getting society to be one way or the other. It's about thinking, how do we be Christian in this society? So one of the ways that I'm passionate about is what they're kind of calling a new apologetics, which is actually really an old apologetics. We need to show people that Christianity is good, because some people don't know that it's good. There's been a lot of people that's just given it a bad name, which is unfortunate. Christianity has done some totally terrible things. We're not the only religion that does terrible things. but we got to face the music and realize that kind of hurts people are experiencing. So when I say apologetics, this term meaning defend the faith, I want to tell people about, here's some good things about Christianity. I want to get back to this idea of Christians being, loving people that want the society to be better, which is not radical at all. It's not progressive. It's almost regressive. I want to get back to what Christianity was supposed to be. So to speak and to be Christian is, one, to recognize the world that we live in for what it is, and then to be above reproach, basically. Be the best you can be. So I use stories to talk to this world because there's that suspicion of Christianity where that sermon is not going to have as much effect as that kid's TV show, as that book, as that song. It sounds sneaky, but it's like a way to get into society, to talk to society when they're not quite open for the straight preaching. It's more palatable, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good term, palatable. I think that's a very, very good term, and I've used it in the past. I think you're right in that we as Christians, we've got to be sure and properly and carefully, going back to your precision of language, to define our terms when we're talking about Christianity. The Christian church of late has been plagued with lots of false teachers and lots of people who are, at their root not Christian, and just kind of using the term as wolves in sheep's clothing. And they've hurt a lot of people and manipulated a lot of people and done a lot of things that are outright non-Christian under the guise of Christianity. So I think we have to be very, very careful. And as you say, we have to be above reproach when we're dealing with people in the world. And we have to speak the truth in love. Like Paul says, we don't back down from the truth. But the way we present it is not in anger or not in frustration. Nobody ever argued anybody, to the cross of Christ. Nobody, so you got to love them to the cross of Christ. And so I think you're exactly right in that. And I pray that that's part of what Theophany Media will be able to do in this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about humor in the Bible. I think that transitions pretty nicely. That seems to be a bit of a passion of yours. Tell us a little bit about the other podcast that Theophany Media puts out, and tell us kind of what led you down that path.
Yeah, I started the podcast, The Bible But Funnier, back in May when I started all this thing. It was kind of the lowest entry podcast, just to kind of experiment with what is this podcasting thing all about. And my approach was to retell Bible stories in funny ways, again, so that it's approachable, palatable, all those kind of things. But also, humor has a way of pointing out truth that we sometimes miss. And I wanted to experiment with that. So when I tell a Bible story in the episode, not always, but sometimes I'm engaging with academic resources, trying to figure out what's the point of this and how do I use humor to bring that out.
Right.
Sometimes it's obvious, but we can miss it. The very first episode is the story of Jonah. And Jonah is a comedy. Whether you think it's history or not, it doesn't matter. The point is, it's funny. Right. This prophet of God is a terrible prophet of God. Right. And I want to use humor to bring out what I think an ancient audience would understand of that's funny or that's odd, that we kind of miss, because sometimes we turn the Bible into so holy that, like, how dare it, make us laugh or give us any kind of emotion other than reverence for God or something like that. Right. But the Bible can make us laugh. And Jesus says some things that are surprising.
Right. Right.
And, he has some sick burns against the scribes and the Pharisees.
Yes, he does.
And there's all of that I want to bring out. So humor does that. It points out what we miss or take for granted. And that's not something I invented. If you watch any kind of comedian, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll tell you a truth, but just kind of up the ante a little bit, just exaggerate. How about that airline food?
Right.
You know what airline food is about, but then they describe it with some really amazing language or something, and they just exaggerate that, they hyperbolize. So that's all I'm doing. I'm trying to be true to the text and pointing out what's funny about it or what's surprising.
And I think one of the really neat powers that comedy brings is that we can often turn the mirror on ourselves. You might be able to say something about your listener who might be a Bible believing Christian or whatever that kind of steps on our toes a little bit, but we're laughing along with you. I know there are lots of Christian comedians that do that and do it really well. And I think that truth can be communicated in that way, and it's not quite as painful, because we're laughing at ourselves. And I think that's a great thing. So I know that you have several resources as well that you're super excited about sharing with our audience. And so I'll be sure and put those resources into our show notes. Just for those listening or watching out there, our show notes are super useful. We try to make them kind of a bonus and a value add for anybody who's listening. So definitely be checking out those show notes for Theophany Media. And Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Anything maybe you're working on right now that you'd like to tell our audience about, or something that is coming up that you're really excited about?
Well, I'm working with an author on a devotional for creative Christians that hopefully will be out soon by the time this podcast releases.
Excellent.
And I think it's going to be a really awesome resource to help Christians develop the spiritual habit of creating and get in that mindset. So super excited for Theophany to publish that.
Awesome.
And there'll be more on that when that comes out.
Okay. And where can they find that? I mean, they're already on the page here, but go ahead and shout it out anyway. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah. You can find information about that on theophanymedia.com. We have an email newsletter. You can follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Theophany Media. You can find us in those places, and we can connect.
All right, Jake. And what about you personally? Do you want folks following you anywhere online?
If you want to, I guess. I'm at Jake Doberenz on Twitter and something similar on Facebook. Jake Doberenz author, I think it says after my name. And then on Instagram at Jake Doberenz Writes, and then jakedoberenz.com. And the spelling of Doberenz, you can find that in the show notes.
And maybe the pronunciation as well, since I got it wrong, right?
That's okay. It's all right. It's German or something. I don't know.
All right. Well, again, Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of Theophany Media and for being a part of Creatively Christian. I've been having a blast and looking forward to many, many podcasts in the future.
Yeah. So, I'm blessed to have you, Brandon. Thank you so much for interviewing me.
Absolutely. If you don't mind, I'll love to close us with a little prayer.
Please.
All right, let's pray. Hi, King of Heaven, we just come before you, thanking you so much, Father, for making us creative. I thank you for Jake, Father, and for inspiring him last May, and for giving him not just the idea and the inspiration for Theophany Media, but also the resilience and the wherewithal to make it into something that's real. So many times, Father, I know that that's a huge challenge for us as Christian creatives. And I pray, Father, that we will be receptive to your Holy Spirit as you urge us through the person of the Holy Spirit to do things that will further your kingdom. I pray that we will do it carefully and wisely, and we will do it with instruction from your holy word, and also with accountability of those who are other believers near us that show us the way. I thank you for friends within the Christian media space, and there are many, Father, and I encourage our listeners as they're out there to network with all these wonderful people who are out there who are just wanting to spread the word about your son, Jesus, and about the cross of Christ and about the gospel. And again, Father, I thank you for the opportunity to be on this podcast and to do all those same things. I pray that you will gain all the glory for all that's been done here today. I pray that we will make much of the name of Christ and that many people will come to know him in salvation. And it's in his name that we pray and ask all things. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for having me.
Likewise, man. Thanks for letting me have you. All right, Jake, I will talk to you soon. Everybody out there in podcast land, thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is Brannon and Jake. We're signing off. Creatively Christian is a product of Theophany Media. You can find out more at theophanymedia.com. This show is hosted by Brannon Hollingsworth, Andrea Sandefur, Bill Brooks, and Lynn Baber. Our logo is by Bill Brooks. Our music is by Bill Brooks and Andrea Sandefur. To join our exclusive patron community, which includes bonus episodes and so much more, go to theophanymedia.com/creatively Christian. Have a blessed day and keep on creating for our Lord.